My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm 58 years old. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when I opened my inbox to find an email from my son James. The subject line was simply family decision. My coffee was still warm in my hand as I clicked it open, unprepared for the words that would shatter my world. Mom, after discussing this with Sarah and the rest of the family, we've agreed you're no longer part of this family. Don't come to any gatherings. The mug slipped from my fingers, ceramic and coffee exploding across the kitchen floor. I couldn't breathe. How could 34 years of love, sacrifice, and memories end with a few tapped-out sentences? In that moment, I realized I had been exiled from my own family. Before I dive deeper into how my own children decided to erase me from their lives, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever felt the sting of family rejection, even on a smaller scale, hit that like button to let me know I'm not alone. Subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories that show how we can survive even our deepest heartbreaks. Now, let me take you back to understand how a once close-knit family fell apart so completely. Before the fractures that would eventually shatter our family, we were what most would consider close-knit. I had 3 children who were my entire world. James, my eldest at 34. Always the serious, responsible one. Rebecca, 31, compassionate and determined. And Michael, my youngest at 28, creative and warm-hearted. Their father, Thomas, was my high school sweetheart and the love of my life. We built our modest home together, filling it with more love than luxury. Then, without warning, Thomas suffered a massive heart attack when the children were teenagers. James was 17, Rebecca 14, and Michael just 11. I still remember the hospital corridor, the doctor's face, and the impossible task of returning home to tell my children their father was gone. The years that followed tested our family's resilience. I had been working part-time as a nurse while raising the children, but after Thomas died, I took on double shifts and weekend work at the hospital. Many nights, I would come home after a 12-hour shift to help Rebecca with science homework or listen to Michael practice his clarinet. Sleep became a luxury I rarely afforded myself. "Mom, you don't have to work so much," James would say during his senior year, noticing the exhaustion etched into my face. "Your education comes first," I would respond. "All 3 of you are going to college. Your father and I promised each other that." Despite our financial constraints, I maintained our family traditions with fierce determination. Sunday dinners remained sacred, even if it meant I prepared everything Saturday night before my weekend shift and left detailed reheating instructions for James. Holidays were celebrated with whatever I could afford, often supplemented by handmade gifts and decorations created during rare free hours. Those difficult years, surprisingly, brought us closer. James stepped up, becoming a second parent to his siblings while still maintaining his grades for college. Rebecca developed her nurturing side, often having dinner started when I returned from work. Even young Michael found ways to contribute, keeping the house tidy and leaving funny notes in my lunch bag to make me smile during breaks. When James was accepted to law school, we all celebrated as if we'd each received the acceptance letter. The same happened when Rebecca entered medical school and when Michael decided to become a teacher. Every achievement felt collective, hard-earned victories for Team Wilson, as Thomas used to call us. I never remarried. Between my shifts at the hospital and supporting 3 ambitious children, there simply wasn't time for dating. But I never felt resentment about this sacrifice. Watching my children grow into remarkable adults was compensation enough. 5 years ago, James introduced us to Sarah, a marketing executive he'd met through a colleague. She was polished, articulate, and clearly ambitious, qualities I immediately admired. At their first dinner with our family, she complimented my homemade lasagna and asked thoughtful questions about our family history. I welcomed her warmly, grateful that James had found someone who seemed to understand the importance of family. Their wedding was a joyful affair, with Rebecca as a bridesmaid and Michael giving a heartfelt toast that left few dry eyes in the venue. I contributed what I could financially, and spent weeks creating personalized wedding favors that Sarah had mentioned wanting but couldn't fit into their budget. "You've raised an incredible man," Sarah told me at the reception, embracing me tightly. "I promise to make him as happy as you've made this family." I believed her completely. How could I have known that within 5 years, she would be instrumental in removing me from the family I had sacrificed everything to preserve. The first signs of change were subtle. Family dinners began migrating from my modest home to James and Sarah's larger house in a gated community. At first, this seemed practical and generous. They had more space, and Sarah enjoyed entertaining. I brought my traditional dishes and helped in their kitchen, grateful that our gatherings continued, regardless of location. But with each passing month, I noticed small shifts. Sarah suggested updating our holiday traditions. My Christmas cookie recipes, passed down from my grandmother, were replaced by gourmet ones Sarah found in upscale food magazines. The ornaments the children had made in school, which I'd carefully preserved for decades, remained in their boxes as Sarah decorated their tree with coordinating designer ornaments. "Mom, nobody wants those old paper stars anymore," Rebecca said when I mentioned it, not unkindly but with a dismissiveness that stung. "Sarah's tree looks like something from a magazine." I swallowed my hurt and nodded. After all, change was natural in growing families, wasn't it? The transformation of our family happened so gradually that I can't pinpoint exactly when Sarah's preferences began to supersede our family traditions entirely. What I do know is that within 2 years of their marriage, our gatherings had changed fundamentally. Thanksgiving, which had always been a casual, laughter-filled event at my house with mismatched chairs squeezed around an expanded table, evolved into a formal affair at James and Sarah's home. Name cards assigned seating. Crystal glassware replaced the commemorative cups from family vacations we'd always used. My traditional stuffing recipe, the one Thomas had raved about every year, was deemed too rustic by Sarah, who preferred a gourmet version with exotic mushrooms and truffle oil. "We're elevating things a bit this year, Mom," James explained when I arrived with my casserole dishes and found an already complete spread on their dining table. My contributions were quietly relegated to the kitchen counter, largely untouched. Christmas underwent a similar transformation. Sarah instituted a color-coordinated gift wrap policy. All presents under their tree needed to match her annual decorating theme. The chaotic, joyful gift opening of Christmas mornings past was replaced by a measured, one-at-a-time unwrapping while Sarah took professional quality photos for social media. More concerning than these surface changes was how my children began aligning with Sarah during disagreements. The first time Rebecca sided against me in a family discussion about summer vacation plans, I felt a distinct shift in our dynamic. "Mom, Sarah's right. A beach house rental makes more sense than everyone cramming into your 2-bedroom condo at the lake," Rebecca said, not meeting my eyes. The lake house, she referred to so dismissively, was where we'd spent every summer since the children were born, where their father had taught them all to swim. "We've outgrown the lake house," James added firmly. "It's time for new traditions." Sarah's criticisms of me, while never overtly hostile, carried a subtle but persistent undermining quality. She would compliment my outfit, then immediately suggest shopping trips to update my style. She praised my cooking, then explained how certain ingredients I used were unhealthy. She thanked me for my childcare advice, then explained why modern parenting research contradicted my experiences. "Your mom is so cute with her old-fashioned ideas," I overheard her telling Rebecca during a family gathering. "But honestly, it's exhausting always managing her expectations." I tried to adapt, working hard to remain flexible and open-minded. When family celebrations permanently relocated to James and Sarah's home, I offered to come early to help prepare or stay late to clean up. These offers were increasingly declined. "We've got it handled, Mom," James would say. "You just show up and relax." But relaxing became increasingly difficult as I felt my role diminishing. My calls to James went from daily to weekly, then to brief conversations that he often cut short due to work or other obligations. When I called Sarah to try to strengthen our relationship, she was unfailingly polite but somehow always busy. I attempted to connect with Sarah through occasional lunch dates and shopping trips, hoping to build the mother-in-law divided by daughter-in-law bond I'd always wanted. During one such lunch, Sarah mentioned they were thinking of starting a family soon. I expressed my excitement, perhaps too enthusiastically. "You'll be such wonderful parents. And I'm more than happy to help with childcare anytime you need. Being a grandmother has been my dream since the kids were little." Sarah's smile tightened. "That's generous, Margaret, but we'll likely hire a professional nanny." With your nursing schedule and, modern childcare approaches being so different from when you raised kids. 3 months later, at a family brunch, Sarah and James announced she was pregnant. In my joy, I burst into tears and rushed to embrace them both, already talking about the baby clothes I could knit and the cradle Thomas had built for James that was stored in my attic. Later, I heard Sarah telling Rebecca, "See what I mean?" I tried to make our announcement special, and Margaret immediately made it all about herself and what she's going to do. It's always like that. The alliance against me grew stronger. Rebecca began calling less frequently. Michael, who had once visited weekly for our movie nights, became too busy with his teaching career and relationship with Alex. When I expressed hurt about the growing distance, my concerns were dismissed as guilt-tripping or being stuck in the past. "Mom, we're adults with our own lives now," Rebecca explained during one rare phone call. "You need to find some hobbies or friends your own age." The suggestion wounded me deeply. I had friends my own age, of course, but after devoting decades to being the best mother possible, hearing that my children now considered me an obligation rather than a joy was devastating. The gap between us widened, one small slight at a time. The birth of Sarah and James's daughter, Emma, should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. Instead, it became a series of painful exclusions that widened the growing rift between us. It began with the baby shower. I spent weeks knitting a beautiful baby blanket with a pattern my grandmother had taught me, incorporating the soft yellow and green colors Sarah had chosen for the nursery. I also assembled a basket of practical items every new mother needs but rarely receives: nipple cream, sitz bath supplies, comfortable nursing bras, and freezable meals portioned for two. When I presented these gifts at the shower, Sarah opened the blanket with a tight smile. "How traditional," she said, quickly setting it aside for the designer sleep sacks another guest had purchased. My practical basket was met with uncomfortable laughter. "Margaret, this is awfully intimate," Sarah commented, her friends exchanging glances. Later, I overheard one of her friends asking if I had boundary issues. When Emma was born, I rushed to the hospital only to be told by James that they were limiting visitors for the first few days. I waited patiently, only to discover through Facebook that Sarah's parents, friends, and colleagues had already been welcomed. When I was finally permitted to visit 3 days later, my time was limited to 30 minutes, and Sarah's mother watched carefully as I held Emma, immediately suggesting the baby needed feeding when she began to fuss in my arms. "Mom, we're really tired," James explained as he walked me out far earlier than I'd anticipated. "Sarah needs rest." I offered repeatedly to help with night feedings, meal preparation, or just holding Emma so the new parents could shower or nap. Each offer was politely declined. "We've got a postpartum doula coming in daily," Sarah explained. "And my mom is staying for the first month." When I sang the lullaby I'd sung to all 3 of my children while holding Emma during one visit, Sarah took the baby from my arms. "Those old songs have such creepy lyrics when you really listen," she said. "We're playing classical music and nature sounds for Emma instead. Studies show it's better for cognitive development." The pattern continued as Emma grew. My offers to babysit were consistently refused with various excuses. They had a regular sitter they trusted. Emma was too young to be away from Sarah. Their pediatrician advised against disrupting her schedule. The Christmas after Emma's birth brought another painful incident. I carefully packed the special ornaments Thomas and I had collected for each child's first Christmas, including James's, a delicate glass star with his name and birth date. When I presented the box to Sarah and James, suggesting we might hang it on their tree for Emma's first Christmas, Sarah frowned. "That doesn't really match our theme this year," she said. "And honestly, those old ornaments are probably full of lead paint or something." Safety standards were so different back then. James didn't even meet my eyes. "We've already decorated. Mom, the tree is done." As the months passed, I began noticing family events happening without my knowledge. Rebecca's promotion celebration appeared on Facebook with photos of James, Sarah, Emma, Michael, and Alex all toasting at an upscale restaurant. When I called Rebecca to congratulate her, she seemed uncomfortable. "Oh, it was just a last-minute thing," she explained. "Sarah made the reservation and only had room for a small group. I discovered Michael and Alex were engaged through a group text that seemed to assume I already knew. When I called to congratulate them, Michael sounded guilty. Sorry you found out that way, Mom. We announced it at dinner last weekend. I thought James would have told you. The final breaking point came at Emma's first birthday planning. I called James to ask what I could contribute to the celebration. Actually, Mom, the party planning is all handled, he said. Sarah's got everything coordinated already, but I haven't heard any details, I pressed. When and where is it happening? What can I bring for my only granddaughter's first birthday? The line went silent for a moment too long. Sarah's parents rented out that children's activity center across town. It's next Saturday at 11. Next Saturday? But I'm scheduled to work. If I'd known earlier. My voice broke. James, why wasn't I consulted about this? Why am I always the last to know everything now? This is exactly the problem, Mom. James's voice hardened. You always make everything about you. Sarah has been planning this for months. It's Emma's day, not yours. Something in me snapped after years of building frustration. This isn't about me. This is about being excluded from my own family. Sarah has been pushing me out since the day you married her, and none of you even notice. That's unfair and untrue, James countered, his voice rising. Sarah has been nothing but accommodating to you. You're the one who can't accept that things change, that we have our own family unit now. I'm still your mother, I cried. I'm still part of this family. Maybe it's time you accepted a different role then, he replied coldly. Either accept that things are different now and stop making Sarah uncomfortable with your expectations, or maybe we need some distance. Are you giving me an ultimatum? I asked, barely believing what I was hearing. Take it however you want, Mom. But Sarah's my wife, Emma's my daughter, and they're my priority now. You need to adjust to that reality. I hung up, shaking with anger and hurt. 2 days later, the email arrived that would formalize my excommunication from the family I had devoted my life to building. The complete email from James was longer and more devastating than the excerpt I initially shared. After staring at my screen for several minutes, unable to process what I was reading, I forced myself to absorb every word. Mom, after discussing this with Sarah and the rest of the family, we've agreed you're no longer part of this family. Don't come to any gatherings. Your behavior has become increasingly problematic, and your inability to respect boundaries is causing stress for everyone, especially Sarah. Your constant criticism of our parenting choices and attempts to undermine Sarah's role as Emma's mother have created an unhealthy environment. Rebecca and Michael agree that a clean break is necessary for everyone's mental health. We ask that you not contact any of us for the foreseeable future. If you attempt to visit, we will not answer the door. If this boundary isn't respected, we'll be forced to take more formal measures. This isn't a decision we've made lightly, but it's necessary. James, my hands trembled so violently I could barely see the screen. Criticism? Undermining? These accusations bore no resemblance to reality as I had experienced it. I had bent over backwards trying to accommodate Sarah's changes, swallowed my hurt when family traditions were discarded, remained silent when my offers of help were rejected. How had my attempts to remain connected to my children been so completely misconstrued? After the initial shock subsided, denial set in. This couldn't be real. There must be some misunderstanding. I reached for my phone and called James, my heart pounding as it rang repeatedly before going to voicemail. I left a message, my voice breaking. James, it's Mom. I just got your email. There must be some mistake. Please call me back so we can talk about this. No response came. I tried Rebecca next, then Michael. Both calls went straight to voicemail, suggesting their phones had been turned off or I had been blocked. I sent text messages to all 3 children. Please talk to me. I don't understand what's happened. Whatever I did wrong, I want to make it right. The messages showed as delivered, but remained unanswered. Hours passed, then days. My text to Michael eventually showed as read, but no response came. 3 days after receiving the email, desperate for any kind of explanation or resolution, I drove to James and Sarah's house. I had never dropped by unannounced before, always respecting their privacy, but desperation overrode protocol. I saw both their cars in the driveway and Sarah's shadow moving behind the living room curtains. I rang the doorbell, heart hammering in my chest. The door opened 6 inches, secured by a chain. Sarah stood in the gap, her expression cold. Margaret, you shouldn't be here. We asked for space. Please, Sarah, I don't understand what's happening. I need to talk to James. He doesn't want to talk to you right now. You need to respect our boundaries and leave. But what did I do? My voice rose, cracking with emotion. At least tell me what I did wrong. This is exactly the problem, Sarah replied, her voice carrying into the quiet neighborhood. The drama, the refusal to accept responsibility, the public scenes. You need to leave now, or we'll have to call someone. The door closed firmly in my face. I stood there, aware of curtains twitching in neighboring homes, the ultimate humiliation of being treated like an unwanted stranger at my son's door. I returned to my car and sat there sobbing, unable to drive for nearly an hour. That evening, I received a brief clinical text from Rebecca. This is for the best, Mom. We need space. Please respect that. A day later, Michael finally called. For a moment, hope flared that at least one of my children would hear me out. But his voice was distant, formal. Mom, I'm calling to ask you to stop trying to contact us. This isn't easy for anyone. Michael, please, I begged. Just help me understand. What have I done that's so terrible? It's not any one thing, Mom. It's a pattern. James is really upset, and I have to support him on this one. We all do. But I'm your mother. Doesn't that count for anything? His voice softened slightly. It's just temporary, Mom. Give us the space we're asking for. Get some help. Before I could respond, he had ended the call. Get some help. The implication was clear. They believed I was the problem, that I needed psychological intervention. The child I had nursed through pneumonia twice, whose science fair projects I had helped complete at midnight, whose heart I had mended after his first breakup, now viewed me as someone mentally unstable who needed help. The weeks that followed were the darkest of my life, worse even than after Thomas died. Then, at least, I had my children to focus on, a reason to get out of bed each morning. Now, I moved through my empty house like a ghost, surrounded by photographs and mementos that mocked me with happier times. Friends called, concerned when I stopped attending social gatherings. But I couldn't bear to explain what had happened. How do you tell someone your entire family has decided you no longer exist? The shame was overwhelming. I told vague lies about being busy or feeling under the weather, then stopped answering calls altogether. My house, once the bustling center of family life, fell silent. I found myself setting the table for 5 out of habit, then breaking down at the sight of the empty chairs. I'd pick up my phone to share a funny story or accomplishment with one of the kids, only to remember I'd been cut off. Each instinctive reach toward my family, followed by the fresh wound of remembering their rejection, was like experiencing the loss anew. I had built my entire identity around being a mother and grandmother. With that role forcibly stripped away, who was I now? What purpose remained for the woman who had devoted everything to a family that no longer wanted her? 6 weeks into my isolation, my phone rang with a call from my sister Laura, who lived in Arizona. We spoke a few times a year, mostly on birthdays and holidays, so her midweek call was unusual. Margaret, are you okay? I've been hearing some concerning things. My grip tightened on the phone. What kinds of things? Laura hesitated. Well, Sarah called me last week. She said the family is worried about your mental state. She mentioned something about you becoming unstable after Thomas died and finally having some sort of breakdown. The room seemed to tilt sideways. What? That's absolutely not true. They've cut me off completely, Laura. James sent me an email saying I'm no longer part of the family, and none of them will speak to me. Sarah said you might say something like that, Laura replied cautiously. She mentioned you've been having trouble distinguishing between reality and, well, your perception of events. Ice flooded my veins as I realized what was happening. Laura, I can forward you the email James sent me. I'm not making this up or imagining it. I'm not saying you are, Margaret. But Sarah was very convincing. She's called several family members, apparently. Cousin Ruth called me afterward, concerned that you've been deteriorating for years without proper help. The systematic campaign to discredit me extended beyond my immediate family. Sarah, with my children's apparent approval, was rewriting my history for the extended family, portraying me as mentally unstable rather than a mother being deliberately excluded. The next revelation came from my friend Denise, who called after receiving a strange Facebook message from Rebecca. Rebecca reached out asking if I'd noticed any concerning behavior from you lately, Denise explained. She said they're gathering information for some kind of intervention. Margaret, what's going on? Through Denise, I discovered that Rebecca had contacted several of my friends with similar inquiries, describing me as dangerously possessive of Emma and unable to accept boundaries. My daughter, the doctor, was using her professional credibility to pathologize my desire for a relationship with my granddaughter. The betrayal cut deeper with each new discovery. James had apparently told colleagues that I was having difficulty accepting change and needed professional help. The church community I'd been part of for decades began treating me differently after Sarah spoke with the pastor's wife about her concerns for my mental health. My next-door neighbor of 20 years, Betty, stopped by one afternoon with a casserole, something she'd never done before despite our friendly relationship. "I thought you might need some support," she said awkwardly on my doorstep. "Sarah mentioned you've been going through a rough patch. Are you getting help for your issues?" "What exactly did Sarah tell you?" I asked. Attempting to keep my voice steady, Betty shifted uncomfortably. "Just that you've been struggling since Thomas passed, bottling things up instead of processing properly. She's worried about your isolation and some angry outbursts." Angry outbursts. I, who prided myself on remaining calm and reasonable even in the most stressful hospital situations, was being portrayed as volatile and unstable. The most painful revelation came through social media. Though I rarely checked Facebook, loneliness drove me to scroll through my feed one evening. A photo appeared from Michael's account, a family gathering on the beach. James, Sarah, Emma, Rebecca, Michael, and Alex all smiled from a Hawaiian shoreline, leash around their necks. The caption read, "Family vacation finally happening." The timestamp showed it was posted 3 days earlier. A family vacation I knew nothing about. Comments from friends and family expressed joy at seeing the whole family together, as if I had never existed at all. As I pieced together these discoveries, a disturbing pattern emerged. This wasn't a sudden decision based on some egregious behavior on my part. This appeared to be a calculated, long-term strategy to isolate and discredit me, with Sarah as the likely architect. Why would my children participate in such a campaign? Had I truly been such a terrible mother that they would rewrite history to justify cutting me off? Or had Sarah's influence been so powerful that she'd managed to convince them I was the villain in our family story? I recalled conversations where Sarah had subtly questioned my parenting decisions. "It must have been so hard raising 3 kids essentially as a single mother," she once remarked. "I'm amazed they turned out so well despite the circumstances." The implication, that my children succeeded despite my parenting rather than because of it, had slipped past me at the time. Now, I wondered how many such seeds had been planted over the years. The isolation grew more complete as mutual friends began distancing themselves, unsure which version of events to believe. When invited to dinner by a couple we had all known for years, I overheard them mention they had invited James and Sarah another night to avoid any awkwardness. The community I had built over decades was dissolving before my eyes. Each new discovery reinforced my growing suspicion. I hadn't been cut off because I had changed. I had been cut off because I remained the same in a family that Sarah was methodically reshaping in her preferred image. My continued presence represented an unwanted connection to traditions, values, and memories that didn't fit her vision for her new family. And somehow, she had convinced my children that the mother who had sacrificed everything for them was actually a threat to their happiness. By the 3-month mark of my estrangement, I barely recognized myself. The vibrant, capable woman who had raised 3 children single-handedly while working full-time as a nurse had disappeared. In her place was a hollow-eyed ghost who moved between bed and couch, often forgetting to eat or change clothes. I had taken a leave of absence from the hospital, unable to focus on patients' needs when my own emotional state was so fragile. My supervisor, concerned about the sudden change in my reliable performance, suggested I take some time to sort things out. The paycheck stopped, but I barely noticed as my modest savings dwindled. Sleep became my enemy. Each night, I would lie awake replaying every interaction with my children and Sarah, searching for the fatal mistakes I must have made. When exhaustion finally pulled me under, nightmares jolted me awake, dreams where I screamed for my children in crowded rooms while they walked past, looking through me as if I were invisible. The Christmas season, once my favorite time of year, arrived like a cruel joke. Out of habit, I bought gifts for everyone: James, Sarah, Emma, Rebecca, Michael, and Alex, and wrapped them in beautiful paper with handwritten tags. They sat in my living room, a pathetic testament to my denial. On Christmas Eve, I set the table for 7, put on the holiday music Thomas and I had always played, and prepared a full traditional dinner. I sat alone at the fully set table, raising a glass in a toast to empty chairs. The leftovers filled my refrigerator for weeks. I couldn't bear to throw away the physical evidence of my delusion that somehow my family would return to me for the holidays. My appearance deteriorated along with my mental state. I stopped coloring my hair, which quickly revealed inches of gray. My clothes hung loosely as weight dropped from my already slim frame. Basic self-care became an insurmountable challenge. Why shower when no one would see me? Why prepare proper meals when toast would quiet the hunger pangs enough to sleep again? I found myself talking to Thomas's photograph regularly, the one-sided conversations my only social interaction for days at a stretch. Where did I go wrong, Thomas? Was I too protective? Too demanding? Not demanding enough? If you were here, would they still have cut me off? In my darkest moments, I contemplated whether my children would feel remorse if I simply disappeared. The life insurance policy Thomas had insisted upon was still active. Perhaps my final act as a mother could be securing their financial futures while relieving them of the burden of my existence. These thoughts frightened me enough to hide my medications and car keys from myself during particularly bleak episodes. I wasn't actively suicidal, but the passive wish to simply stop existing grew stronger as isolation deepened. The turning point came on a cold February morning, nearly 4 months after James's email. I hadn't left my house in 9 days. Mail piled untouched on the hall table. Unwashed dishes filled the sink. I had been wearing the same pajamas for nearly a week. My doorbell rang, a sound so unexpected I initially didn't recognize it. When it rang again, insistently, I shuffled to the door in a daze and opened it without checking who stood outside. My 6-year-old neighbor Rose stood on my doorstep, her lined face creased with concern. She had moved in next door the previous year, and we had exchanged pleasantries, but weren't close. "Margaret? My goodness, are you ill?" Her direct question, asked with genuine concern, caught me off guard. "I'm fine," I managed, suddenly aware of my disheveled state. Rose's eyes took in my appearance and the glimpse of my neglected home visible behind me. "No, dear, you're not fine at all. I haven't seen you in weeks, your newspapers are piling up, and frankly, you look terrible. I'm coming in, and I'm making us both some tea." Too exhausted to argue, I stepped aside. Rose moved efficiently through my kitchen, finding cups and tea bags, clearing space at the cluttered table. She didn't comment on the dirty dishes or overflowing trash, just tidied enough space for us to sit. "Now," she said, placing a steaming cup before me, "tell me what's happened." Something about her no-nonsense approach broke through my isolation. The story poured out of me: the gradual exclusion, James's devastating email, the campaign to paint me as unstable, the complete silence from my children. I expected judgment or disbelief, but Rose listened with unwavering attention. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my cold hands in her warm ones. "My dear, I'm so sorry this has happened to you, but I'm afraid I recognize this story all too well." Rose shared that her son had cut her off 15 years earlier after marrying a woman who gradually isolated him from his entire support network. For 5 years, Rose had no contact with him or knowledge of her grandchildren. She described her own descent into depression and isolation, followed by a slow rebuilding of her life. "The shame is what keeps us silent," she explained. "We blame ourselves, thinking we must have been terrible parents to deserve such treatment. But sometimes, Margaret, it has nothing to do with our parenting and everything to do with control." Her words penetrated the fog of self-recrimination that had enveloped me for months. For the first time, I considered that perhaps my children's rejection wasn't entirely my fault. "What did you do?" I asked. "How did you survive this?" "First," she said firmly, "I got help. Not because something was wrong with me, but because I needed support to process this trauma." Then I forced myself to rebuild a life that wasn't centered around being a mother. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but eventually, I found joy again. Before she left, Rose extracted a promise that I would shower, change my clothes, and meet her for lunch the following day. It was the first commitment I had made to another human being in months. A tiny step back toward the land of the living. That night, looking in the mirror at my haggard reflection after my first proper shower in days, I faced a crucial truth. If I continued on this path of isolation and self-neglect, I would not survive. My children had made their choice. Now I needed to make mine. To disappear completely or to find a way forward without them. True to her word, Rose arrived promptly at noon the next day to take me to lunch. I had managed to shower, wash my hair, and put on clean clothes, small actions that had required enormous effort but left me feeling marginally more human. Over soup and sandwiches at a quiet cafe, Rose mentioned a support group that met weekly at the community center. It's for parents estranged from their adult children, she explained. You might find it helpful to talk with others who understand what you're going through. My immediate reaction was resistance. A support group seemed like an admission of failure. A public declaration that I couldn't fix my family situation independently. I don't know, Rose. I'm not really a group therapy person. Neither was I, she replied. I sat in my car for 3 consecutive weeks before I finally got the courage to walk in. But when I did, it was like finding an oasis in the desert. These people understood without explanation. No judgment, no well-meaning but useless advice to just call them or give it time. Just recognition of the unique pain of being rejected by the people you gave your life to. Reluctantly, I agreed to at least consider it. A week later, with Rose beside me for moral support, I found myself in a church basement, sitting in a circle with 8 strangers whose faces reflected the same grief I saw in my mirror daily. The group leader, Susan, a warm-voiced woman in her 60s, welcomed us. For those joining us for the first time, our primary rule is simple. We don't judge each other's pain or situation. Estrangement takes many forms, and each story here is valid. When my turn came to speak, I struggled to articulate the complex series of events that had led to my current situation. I don't know what I did wrong, I concluded, tears streaming down my face. I tried so hard to be supportive, to adapt to changes, to respect their new family unit, and somehow I still ended up being cast out. To my surprise, several heads nodded in recognition. An elderly gentleman named Frank spoke up. That's how it happens for many of us. It's rarely one dramatic event. It's a slow erosion, and we keep making accommodations, hoping that if we just try harder, they'll let us stay in their lives. Susan introduced a concept that would fundamentally shift my understanding of my situation: family scapegoating. In some family systems, she explained, particularly when influenced by someone with certain personality traits, one member is gradually designated as the problem. Everything that goes wrong gets attributed to this person, regardless of their actual behavior. Often, it's the person who represents the strongest connection to the family's history or values. She described how in-laws like Sarah could sometimes facilitate this process, especially if they had what she delicately referred to as narcissistic tendencies, a strong need to control narratives and relationships, coupled with an inability to accept any perceived competition for influence. The most painful part, Susan continued, is that the scapegoated person often internalizes the blame, believing they must have done something terrible to deserve such treatment. The description fit my experience with uncomfortable precision. For months, I had assumed full responsibility for my estrangement, searching desperately for my fatal parental failures. The possibility that external factors beyond my control had contributed significantly to my situation was simultaneously liberating and devastating. After the meeting, a woman named Patricia approached me privately. "Your story resonated with me," she said. "My daughter-in-law orchestrated almost the identical scenario with my son. It took me years to stop blaming myself entirely. How do you cope?" I asked, desperate for practical guidance. "Therapy helped enormously," she replied. "Finding a professional who understands family systems and estrangement specifically made a world of difference. Following this advice, I began seeing Dr. Henderson, a therapist who specialized in family estrangement. In our first session, I poured out my story, still qualifying it with statements like I know I must have done something wrong and, if I had been a better mother, this wouldn't have happened. Dr. Henderson listened attentively, then said something that stopped me cold. Margaret, even if you made mistakes as a parent, and all parents do, nothing justifies the complete excommunication you've experienced without any opportunity for discussion, explanation, or reconciliation. Over subsequent sessions, we explored the dynamics that had developed in my family system. I struggled initially to accept that my children were active participants in my estrangement, not just innocent bystanders manipulated by Sarah. But they're good people, I insisted. They wouldn't deliberately hurt me like this. Good people can make terrible choices, Margaret. Dr. Henderson replied gently. Especially when their perspective has been gradually influenced over time. Understanding the dynamics doesn't excuse cruelty, but it might help you process what's happened. Through therapy and the support group, I began to recognize patterns I had missed. How Sarah had systematically positioned herself as the authority on family relationships. How my children had been rewarded for aligning with her and subtly punished for maintaining independent relationships with me. How decades of family history had been reframed to support a narrative where I was problematic rather than devoted. Identifying these patterns didn't immediately ease the pain, but it helped me stop endlessly searching for the single critical mistake I must have made to deserve such rejection. Slowly, I began reconnecting with old friends I had withdrawn from during my darkest period. My friend Janice, a retired teacher I had known for 20 years, was relieved when I finally returned her calls. "I've been so worried about you," she admitted over coffee. "You disappeared so completely. I even drove by your house a couple times but didn't want to intrude." When I hesitantly explained my situation, her immediate, unquestioning support was like a lifeline. "That's absolutely appalling," she declared. "No matter what led to this, you deserve basic respect and communication." Other friendships proved harder to resurrect. Some mutual friends I had shared with my children had already heard Sarah and James's version of events and treated me with awkward caution. Others simply found the situation too uncomfortable to navigate and maintained polite distance. But new connections began forming as well. Weekly lunches with Rose evolved into a genuine friendship. Members of the support group invited me to social events. My sister Laura, after initial uncertainty, became a fierce ally once she saw the email James had sent and recognized the inconsistencies in Sarah's narrative. 6 months after hitting rock bottom, I had constructed the beginnings of a support network independent of my children. The pain of their absence remained acute, but it no longer defined my every waking moment. I had begun to remember that before I was a mother, I had been a woman with interests, abilities, and an identity of my own, one I now needed to rediscover. 8 months into my estrangement, I returned to nursing. Rather than resuming my previous position at the hospital, I accepted part-time work at a community clinic serving low-income families. The change proved therapeutic in unexpected ways. My first day back in Scrubs, I felt an almost forgotten sense of competence and purpose. Hospital nursing had become routine after decades of practice, but the clinic presented new challenges that engaged my mind and skills fully. More importantly, it connected me with patients who genuinely needed my expertise. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for explaining everything so clearly," said a young mother after I walked her through her toddler's asthma medication regimen. "You're the first person who made me feel like I can actually handle this." Her gratitude was a powerful reminder that I had value beyond my role as a mother, that my knowledge, compassion, and skills made a tangible difference to others. Each shift at the clinic helped rebuild my shattered self-esteem in small, cumulative increments. With a regular schedule imposing structure on my days and a modest but steady income restoring my financial security, I began cautiously exploring other aspects of life I had postponed or neglected. "You should join me at my art class," Rose suggested one day. "You mentioned you used to enjoy painting in college." The memory surprised me. I had indeed taken art classes before meeting Thomas and becoming immersed in building our family. It had been nearly 40 years since I had held a paintbrush with creative intent. The community center offered a beginner's watercolor class on Wednesday evenings. My first attempts were hesitant, awkward renderings of the still life arrangements our instructor, Gabriella, set up. "Don't judge what emerges," she advised, noting my frustration. just experience the process. Over weeks, my rigid expectations loosened. I found unexpected joy in the unpredictable behavior of water and pigment. The meditative focus required to observe light and shadow. The class became a highlight of my week, not because I produced masterpieces, but because for 2 hours, my mind engaged completely with something other than loss. The class also introduced me to new acquaintances who knew nothing of my family situation. They saw me simply as Margaret the nurse who was discovering watercolors, not as an estranged mother carrying a burden of rejection. These uncomplicated interactions allowed me to practice being present without the weight of my history coloring every exchange. As summer approached, I made a practical but symbolically significant decision. I would downsize from my 4-bedroom family home to a smaller apartment closer to the clinic and community center. The house, with its empty bedrooms and memories in every corner, had become more mausoleum than home. The process of sorting through 35 years of family possessions proved emotionally grueling but ultimately cathartic. Each item required a decision: keep, donate, discard, or set aside for children who might someday want family mementos. I worked methodically through closets and cupboards, occasionally pausing when an object triggered a particularly powerful memory. Thomas's fishing tackle box, still containing the lures he had organized so meticulously. Michael's high school graduation tassel. The china set my mother had given us as a wedding present, used only for special occasions. Rebecca's collection of science fair ribbons. James's first briefcase, left behind when he upgraded to a leather one. Some treasures I kept: family photographs, Thomas's wedding ring, handmade Mother's Day cards. Others I carefully packed in labeled boxes and stored in my sister Laura's garage, leaving open the possibility that someday my children might want these tangible pieces of their history. The hardest items to part with were Emma's baby gifts: the hand-knit blanket, tiny clothes I had purchased before her birth, a silver rattle engraved with her initials. I had bought or made these items with such hope, imagining a close relationship with my granddaughter. Now, they represented dreams that had died before fully forming. After much deliberation, I donated most of the baby items to the clinic, knowing they would benefit families who would appreciate them. The blanket I kept, tucked away with a note explaining its significance, should Emma ever wish to know her grandmother's handiwork. Moving day arrived in early June. My new apartment was compact but filled with natural light, with a small balcony overlooking a community garden. I had purchased a few new items: a comfortable reading chair, brightly colored cushions, a modern lamp. Deliberate choices to signal this space was about my present and future, not just a repository for my past. "It feels good," I told Dr. Henderson during our session that week. "Sad, but also freeing. Like I'm acknowledging what's happened and choosing to continue living anyway." The first birthday I spent alone initially loomed as a dreaded milestone. In previous years, my children had always made my birthday special with calls, cards, and usually a family dinner. The prospect of silence on that day symbolized everything I had lost. Rose, having traversed this territory before me, suggested a radical alternative: plan something special for yourself, something you've always wanted to do but put off. I had always wanted to see the sunrise over the ocean, but had never made time for such an indulgence. My birthday fell on a Saturday in July, perfect timing for such an excursion. Rose offered to accompany me on the 2-hour drive to the coast. We left at 3:30 a.m., traveling in comfortable silence through the darkness. Arriving at the beach, we set up camp chairs on the sand and wrapped ourselves in blankets against the pre-dawn chill. As the horizon gradually lightened, changing from black to navy to purple to fiery orange, an unexpected sense of peace settled over me. "It's so much bigger than our problems, isn't it?" I murmured, watching the sun's first brilliant edge appear. "That's why I come here." Rose nodded. "It helps with perspective." The day continued with breakfast at a beachside cafe, a leisurely walk along the shore, and unhurried conversation. No birthday cake, no cards, no traditional celebrations. Yet somehow, it didn't feel like deprivation. It felt like discovery. As months passed, I noticed a subtle but significant shift. Good days began to outnumber bad ones. While I still experienced waves of grief over my lost family relationships, these episodes no longer completely derailed me. I had developed coping mechanisms: calling a friend, attending a support group meeting, losing myself in a painting, walking in the park near my apartment. My sister Laura visited for a week in September, our relationship strengthened by the crisis rather than damaged by it. She had initially maintained contact with James and Rebecca, but grew increasingly troubled by the narrative they presented. I realized they were rewriting history, she told me during her visit. The mother they described bears no resemblance to the sister I've known all my life. When I questioned some of their claims, they became defensive and evasive. Her support was particularly meaningful when our cousin Stephen repeated some of Sarah's allegations at a family gathering Laura attended. I shut that down immediately, Laura recounted. I told him I had seen the email they sent you and that nobody deserves to be discarded that way, regardless of any family tensions. He seemed shocked. I think he'd only heard their highly edited version of events. These small victories didn't restore my family, but they helped preserve my dignity and truth against the campaign to redefine me. More importantly, they reinforced that I wasn't entirely alone in the world, even without my children. By the 1-year mark of my estrangement, I had constructed a life that, while not the one I would have chosen, contained genuine moments of satisfaction and connection. The pain had not disappeared, but it had transformed from an all-consuming fire to a persistent ache that flared occasionally but could be managed. I had survived the unimaginable. And in surviving, I had discovered strengths and capacities I never knew I possessed. 2 years after receiving James's devastating email, my life had transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. My part-time nursing position had expanded to include training new clinic staff, drawing on my decades of experience. My watercolor paintings, while amateur, had progressed enough that 2 were included in a community art exhibition. My apartment had become a true home, filled with books, art supplies, and plants that thrived under my care. The support group remained a cornerstone of my stability, though my role had evolved from desperate newcomer to experienced member who could offer perspective to those freshly wounded by family rejection. Several members had become close friends, forming a chosen family bound by shared experience and mutual understanding. On an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, I was purchasing coffee at a small cafe when I heard a familiar voice order at the counter beside me. Medium Americano, extra shot, please. I turned and found myself face to face with Michael, my youngest child. We both froze in mutual shock. I hadn't seen him in 2 years, though I'd occasionally glimpsed family photos on social media before I stopped torturing myself with such searches. He looked good, his dark hair slightly longer than he used to wear it, a new pair of glasses framing his eyes, which now widened in recognition, and something like panic. "Mom," he managed, his coffee order forgotten. "Hello, Michael?" My voice remained steady despite my racing heart. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with 2 years of absence and unanswered questions. Finally, he gestured toward an empty table. "Do you have a minute to sit down?" We settled across from each other, both clutching our coffee cups like lifelines. Michael struggled to maintain eye contact, his gaze darting around the cafe as if seeking escape routes. "You look well," he offered eventually. "Thank you, so do you." I took a deliberate breath. "How is everyone?" "Good. Busy." Emma's talking in full sentences now. Rebecca finished her residency. James made partner at his firm last year. Each update was a glimpse into lives that had continued without me, milestones I'd missed, developments I should have celebrated with them. The pain was acute but manageable, a sign of how far I'd come. "And Alex? Are you two still together?" Michael nodded, a small smile softening his features. "We got married last fall." Small ceremony. The wedding I hadn't been invited to. Another family event that had proceeded as if I didn't exist. I swallowed hard and managed. "Congratulations. I'm happy for you both." Silence descended again, heavy with unspoken history. Finally, Michael set down his cup and met my eyes directly for the first time. "This isn't right, what happened. I've known it for a while." His admission caught me off guard. I had imagined this chance encounter many times, but always as a scenario where I would need to defend myself against accusations or judgment. "Then why, Michael? Why did you all cut me out completely?" He looked down, shame evident in his posture. "It was complicated. Sarah had been building a case against you for a long time. Small comments, reinterpreting past events. She'd point out things you said or did and frame them as controlling or manipulative. And you believed her over your own experiences with me?" "Not at first," he admitted. but she's very persuasive. And James was so adamant, when they presented it as a united front, that you were causing Sarah anxiety and stress that was affecting her pregnancy and then her parenting. It seemed like we had to choose sides. And you chose theirs, I stated simply. I'm not proud of it, he said quietly. The family isn't. It isn't what Sarah portrays on social media. There's a lot of tension. Everything has to be her way, or James gets upset. Rebecca and I walk on eggshells around them. A part of me felt vindicated hearing this confirmation of my suspicions, but it brought no joy. My children were unhappy in the family configuration that had excluded me. A hollow victory at best. Have you considered reaching out before today? I asked. Michael nodded. Many times. But there would be consequences. James has made it clear that anyone who breaks ranks will be cut off too. He controls access to Emma, and Rebecca and I both want relationships with our niece. The manipulation extended beyond me. Then, my children were now caught in the same system of conditional love and loyalty tests that had ejected me. I understand, I said. And surprisingly, I did. Fear of further rejection was a powerful motivator. One I knew intimately. We talked for nearly an hour, carefully navigating the boundaries of what felt safe to discuss. Michael didn't offer false hope about reconciliation with James or returning to the family fold. I didn't press for apologies or promises he couldn't keep. Instead, we shared small details about our current lives, his new teaching position, my volunteer work, books we'd recently read. As our impromptu reunion drew to a close, Michael hesitated. I should have stood up for you. We all should have. Yes, I agreed simply. You should have. We parted with awkward half-waves, making no plans to meet again. I walked back to my apartment in a daze of conflicting emotions, grief freshly activated, relief at finally having some explanation, anger at the confirmation of Sarah's manipulations, and a complex tenderness toward the son, who at least acknowledged the wrong that had been done. That evening, I wrote 3 letters I knew I would never send, one to each of my children. I poured out my love, my hurt, my understanding of the complex dynamics that had fractured our family, and my hopes for their happiness regardless of whether I was part of their lives. The process wasn't about communication but clarification, articulating to myself what I had learned and how I had grown through this ordeal. In the days following my encounter with Michael, I considered whether to pursue further contact. Dr. Henderson helped me work through the complex emotions triggered by this unexpected connection. What do you truly want from any potential relationship with your children now? She asked during our session. After thoughtful consideration, I realized my answer had changed significantly over the past 2 years. Initially, I had wanted everything restored exactly as it had been, a complete return to my central role in their lives. Now, my expectations were both more modest and more substantive. I want mutual respect, I said finally. I don't need to be included in every family gathering or consulted on every decision. But I do need to be treated with basic dignity. I won't accept being conditionally welcomed back, only to walk on eggshells, constantly fearing another ejection if I say or do something that displeases Sarah or James. This clarity represented enormous growth. I had moved from desperate willingness to accept any terms just to be near my children to a healthier recognition of my own worth and boundaries. I decided not to pursue Michael directly, but to leave the door open, should any of my children choose to walk through it. I would neither chase them nor slam the door in their faces, but I would no longer compromise my dignity for crumbs of connection. Meanwhile, life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Rose and I planned a weekend trip to a nearby state park. My watercolor instructor encouraged me to consider teaching beginner classes at the senior center. A new volunteer position at the hospital's pediatric ward brought weekly joy through reading to children. The surrogate family I had built among friends and support group members gathered regularly for Sunday brunches, holiday celebrations, and impromptu movie nights. We celebrated birthdays, supported each other through health scares and job changes, and created new traditions that honored our chosen connections. Though the pain of family estrangement never completely disappeared, it had transformed from a life-threatening hemorrhage to a well-healed scar, visible, occasionally tender when pressed, but no longer debilitating. The experience had forced me to discover resilience I never knew I possessed and to build an authentic life not defined primarily by motherhood. 2.5 years after being told I was no longer part of the family, I sat on my apartment balcony one evening, painting the sunset that flooded the sky with improbable colors. My phone rested nearby, no longer constantly checked for messages that never came. My calendar showed a week filled with work, friends, and activities I enjoyed. The photographs on my walls included recent memories with new friends alongside preserved images of my children and Thomas. I had lost what I once considered essential to my identity and happiness. Yet somehow, in that loss, I had found myself, not just surviving, but creating a life with genuine meaning and joy. The future remained uncertain, the possibility of reconciliation neither expected nor dismissed, but either way, I would continue to move forward on the path I had built step by painful step. The greatest lesson of my estrangement had been this. Sometimes the family we create after loss can nourish us in ways our original family could not. And sometimes, losing what we thought defined us leads to discovering who we truly are. Have you experienced estrangement or rejection from loved ones? How did you rebuild your sense of self afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my journey has resonated with you or given you hope during your own difficult times, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel for more stories about healing and personal growth. Share this with someone who might be struggling with family relationships. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our pain makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that even in our darkest moments, we have the capacity to create meaningful lives filled with connection and purpose. Your worth isn't determined by those who left, but by the courage with which you continue.